Welcome, everyone. My name is Kristen Taylor. I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Career, Professional Development, and Diversity Initiatives, and I'm happy to join you for this presentation today by Arnold Ventures, and it is on careers in philanthropy and nonprofit law. And so I'm going to pass it over to Vanessa Goodwin, and Vanessa is going to start the presentation. Thank you for joining us.
That was very dramatic. Nike commercial quality, inspiring, I hope. I'm Roxanne Almaraz. I'm the General Counsel of Arnold Ventures, and we're very excited to get to be with you today. My team has very much been looking forward to this. I'll move on to the agenda slide. There are just a couple of things we want to cover with you today. First, we'll just talk about who we are. I'll, of course, have JDs, and hopefully you'll see that there's sort of a diversity of paths that one can take to get into a philanthropic organization like ours. We'd like to talk to you a little bit about what Arnold Ventures does, its mission, and its strategies and operations. We'll provide a brief overview of philanthropy. I mean, it's a word that everyone's heard. I'd certainly heard of it as a law student, but I'd never really focused on it as an industry. And unlike, law firms or big oil and gas companies, since we're Houston-based, that are sort of front and center in their recruitment efforts, philanthropy is a little bit funny and can be a bit of a black box to folks who are still coming up in school. And so we'd like to give you some insight just into our industry in general. We'll talk a little bit about the role of lawyers in philanthropy, i.e., what we, this legal team, does, but also things that someone with legal training can do that isn't a purely legal function within a philanthropic organization. And then finally, point to a few resources that might be of interest to you. And if we do our job at keeping on time, even have room for a little bit of Q&A. So I mentioned that I'm the general counsel. What does that mean? At Arnold Ventures, it means kind of what it customarily means in in-house companies, which is to say, I'm the head honcho. My boss is to oversee the overall legal functions of our organization, try to minimize risk to our organization, make sure we're in compliance with laws and with applicable rules of ethics and standards. Vanessa Goodwin is my assistant general counsel. You'll be hearing from Vanessa in just a moment. She's Houston-based, as am I. Dina Grove is on our team also. She's New York-based, but is gracing us with her presence in Houston this week. We're so lucky. And then Jesse and Krista are also Houston-based lawyers. And I think you'll have an opportunity to hear from Jesse. Krista is about a week in, so we figured we wouldn't kind of throw her to the wolves just yet. So you'll see Chris's background, and of course you can feel free to reach out to her directly if you'd like to hear from her. My path to Arnold Ventures, while we're talking about me, I'm a San Antonio native. I went to the University of Texas at Austin, where I received 2 degrees, a bachelor in journalism and then one in corporate communication. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. When I was, my brother and I are first generation college students. And so I frankly thought that there were kind of 5 jobs you could have. If you went to college, like a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, and, maybe a couple of others. The whole notion that I could have any undergraduate major and still apply to law school was really confusing to me, frankly, out of the gate. So I went ahead and focused on something that I like to do, which is to write. So I picked up those degrees at UT. And then I went on to Stanford Law School and had a wonderful 3 years in sunny but very expensive California. Thereafter, I clerked for a federal judge, the Honorable Barbara M.G. Lynn in the Northern District of Texas. So that's in Dallas. She's now the chief judge. And that was an outstanding experience. Obviously it's litigation. I learned after that year that I did not want to litigate despite that outstanding experience. And so when I started in a law firm, which was Vincent and Elkins here in Houston, I went immediately and focused my attention on a transactional practice as opposed to a dispute type of practice. So my particular focus within the transactional world was mergers and acquisitions. Given that I am Houston based, a lot of it was related to the energy industry. And so I kept on with that path, that professional sort of focus, even as I went on to partnership at Bracewell and then King and Spalding. So all M&A, all for profit, all the time. I say this because that may not be what you necessarily expect as sort of the path to a nonprofit organization. In 2019, I kind of got an unsolicited phone call or two asking me whether I would be interested in taking on this job. While a nonprofit organization is certainly different from the for-profit clients I was working with and certainly different from a law firm, a lot of the skill set that I acquired as a mergers and acquisitions, a corporate transactional attorney, really did kind of port over here, which is to say, with all due respect to my colleagues, it's a lot of cat herding and a lot of very quickly analyzing complex information and kind of putting it all together into one digestible picture that your internal client can readily appreciate. So that's a lot of what I do here is kind of catching things on the fly. And then generally applying them to our risk profile and having an action plan come out of it. The thing that probably was most surprising to me in my own transition was just how sophisticated the work of a nonprofit organization, particularly a philanthropic organization, can be. It is not just big law firms and mega companies that do really high quality, sophisticated work and have the resources to use outside counsel and to have subscriptions to research services, et cetera. Really found incredible opportunities to work with a high quality set of colleagues here at Arnold Ventures. So really excited to be doing whatever I can on the legal side in furtherance of our mission to maximize opportunity and minimize injustice.
So as Roxanne mentioned, my name is Vanessa Goodwin. I'm the Assistant General Counsel at Arnold Ventures. I've been practicing law for a little over 10 years. Unlike Roxanne, I left law school squarely wanting to be a litigator. I loved being in the courtroom. So immediately after graduating, I started as an assistant state attorney prosecuting adult criminal, drug, and violent offenses in Jacksonville, Florida. Specifically, I went to the state attorney's office because I believed I was going to have the authority over my charging and plea decisions, where I could take into account mitigating circumstances and really look at a full person when I was making my decisions. Unfortunately, in practice, I quickly realized that due to sort of the constant election cycle, my authority was more limited. I also learned that that type of limitation didn't exist in federal criminal work. So I spoke with several mentors and realized that there were 2 approaches to getting into federal criminal law, at least in Florida. And that was either continuing to work for 10 to 20 more years at the state attorney's office, or to transfer to a large firm for a few years before going to a U.S. attorney's office. So I did the latter. I went and spent 2 years at a firm in Tampa, and then I went to the U.S. attorney's office in the District of Columbia, which I loved. But I realized that my overall passion for this work was more directed in making the criminal justice system more fair. And so that's why I transitioned to Arnold Ventures, to sort of have more of a macro impact on this space. As you can see, Roxanne and I, we have very different backgrounds, but similar reasons brought us to Arnold Ventures: a desire to use our legal experience to impact larger systemic change, to be involved on the thought partner level. An additional similarity between me and Roxanne that you will see in this field is that it's often the lawyers that work in the philanthropic space. This isn't their first legal job. This is a consistent trait throughout different organizations and nonprofits. Usually the organization is looking for a lawyer that has had some level of substantive legal experience before moving in-house. So we wanted to share a little bit about our backgrounds to show you that there isn't one path to philanthropy. I'm also going to note that we have additional slides of the path for our other team members. You'll see that each one of us has a very diverse background. And that's to note that there isn't one way to philanthropy and there isn't one path that precludes you from being able to contribute in this space. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dina, who will talk to you a little bit more about Arnold Ventures and what we do.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to be having this conversation. So as Vanessa said, we want to start with talking a little bit about what we at Arnold Ventures do. Just like private companies, even in the same sector, are really different. Philanthropies are really different from one another. So just to start from where we are coming from, now to tell you a little about Arnold Ventures. You can see on the slide, our core mission is to invest in evidence-based solutions that maximize opportunity and minimize injustice. A bold statement, and we'll talk more about how it is we do that. A little bit of background, Laura and John Arnold started giving in a big way in about 2010, and they had given about 150 million on average through 2018 when we became Arnold Ventures. I think the giving's probably gone up a little bit each year since then. Now, Laura and John oversee an organization that has more than 90 employees, headquarters here in Houston, but offices in Washington, D.C. and New York City, as well as some employees working all around the country in their own remote offices, a practice that is increased over the last 2 years. You can see from this picture, this is a relatively recent one. Laura and John are fairly young. They're also very involved here. They're in the office. I know John is here today. I'm sure we'll see Laura around too. They're very active in the giving. They're very involved in the strategy and priorities that the organization gives to. They're also members of the Giving Pledge, which you may have heard of or may not, which is a group of philanthropists who are committed not just to giving, but to giving in their lifetimes. So spending down their money while they're still alive, not waiting and spending over the course of the next couple centuries. We focus on a couple of broad categories: criminal justice, health, education, public finance. This is the work that the teams here, you'll sometimes hear us call them the programmatic teams, do. And they do that largely through, we are focused on systems change. So in criminal justice space, for example, we are not providing direct services representing individuals who are charged with a crime. We're not legal aid attorneys here, but instead our teams that work on criminal justice issues are working to make sure that those systems are better funded or better structured or more efficient, or ways of providing better representation to those individuals. And we do that through a lot of ways, primarily giving away money. But those grants can go to research organizations, so think tanks or policy organizations or universities or law schools who are doing research on what works and what better policies would be, to nonprofits. So we do give to legal aid organizations, some of it to support their direct services, less so that, but more to help them develop more efficient models, help them advocate for what they've found that works. We also promote policies that we think work. We have colleagues who work in communications and put together the cool video you saw at the beginning, as well as a range of other things. And we have colleagues who work on advocacy issues. So interfacing with policymakers, with executives, mayors, governors, on change at the state level. And then we also do some really cool and creative giving here. So for example, setting up a nonprofit organization that produces generic drugs to offer those at lower cost than the big pharmaceutical companies do, as a way of meeting one of our strategy areas, drug prices and commercial sector prices. So it's a wide range of what we do and a lot of areas in which we do it. And we're going to step even bigger picture and talk about philanthropy generally now.
So, what is philanthropy, you may ask? Well, we have included 2 quotes about philanthropy from men that have been regarded and remembered for their impact to modern philanthropy as we know it. But you should know that philanthropy can be defined in a lot of different ways. The origin of the word philanthropy is Greek, and it means love for mankind. Today, philanthropy includes the concept of voluntary giving by an individual or a group to promote the common public good. But the term philanthropy, it really encompasses any contribution of an individual or a group to other organizations. These are usually nonprofits that in turn work for the causes of poverty and social problems, improving the quality of life for all citizens. Now, the majority of philanthropic giving today is achieved through grants, as I mentioned, that are designated to support a variety of activities. This includes research, health, education, arts, and culture, as well as alleviating poverty. So how about we talk about a few of the terms that I just referenced? So nonprofit is a general term for an entity that does not generate a profit or distribute income. Now, this is distinct from a tax-exempt organization, as nonprofits aren't automatically exempt from state and federal taxes. Once a nonprofit is created under state law, it can apply for exemption from federal income taxes and state income, property, and sales taxes. So the term tax-exempt organization is usually just referencing a nonprofit entity that has sought and obtained tax exemption from federal income tax from the IRS. Now, you may often hear also of a 501c3, which is just sort of a shorthand for the revenue code that defines a popular type of tax-exempt entity. But tax-exempt entities generally could cover sort of the gambit. There are 23 different types of tax-exempt entities. This includes what you may hear as a 501c4, which is a social welfare organization, a 501c6, which are business leagues or the Chamber of Commerce, or a 501c7, which is like social recreational clubs. So when you hear people use the term philanthropy, they're usually referring to entities that primarily achieve their work through sort of charitable activity or work that primarily benefits the public. These type of entities are 501c3s. And 501c3s can be one of 2 things. It can either be a public charity or a private foundation. The fundamental difference between those 2 types of tax-exempt organizations is how they're funded. So public charities are funded by contributions from a variety of sources. This is usually private and public grants, individual contributions, you name it. While private foundations, they're funded by a limited source. So it's either one person or a family unit that is usually funding these entities. Now, some public charities that you may have heard of are the American Heart Association, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, or the ACLU. They are funded by a multitude of different sources. Now, conversely, private foundations that you may have heard of include the Ford Foundation, the Gates Foundation, or the Hewlett Foundation. All of those organizations are funded by a person or a family. So now we're going to transition to talk a little bit more about sort of modern philanthropy.
And you'll be unsurprised that we put ourselves in the category of modern philanthropy. So as Vanessa mentioned, most philanthropy is through private foundations, which are tax-exempt organizations, and that tax exemption carries certain benefits, namely not paying taxes, but it also comes with limitations. So when Congress decided that some money could be exempt from taxation, it also decided that that meant you could only use it for limited purposes, namely charitable, which cuts out some things that philanthropists and folks interested in policy change like to do, like engage in the political space. So engage with politicians, with legislators to try to make change through their work. So a lot of philanthropies, including us, have now incorporated as limited liability entities, so LLCs. So I do not work for a private foundation. I work for Arnold Ventures, which is an LLC, but we administer entities like the Laura and John Arnold Foundation, which is a private foundation. So it just gives us more flexibility to do the things we do. Vanessa, you can jump to the next slide. But we also administer other entities, one of which is also an LLC, Action Now Initiative, as well as the Arnold's Donor Advised Fund, which is just another charitable entity. And there's various tax reasons to use all of these, but the trend in modern philanthropies has been to take a step back and say, what more can we do to reach the good results we're trying to achieve? All of that is very big picture. So we're going to talk for just a little bit about what does a day-to-day look like if you are a lawyer in philanthropy. So some of it you are probably already picking up on, right? The categories of work that we tend to think about is organizational support. So what does Arnold Ventures need? And programmatic support. How do we support our colleagues who are out there doing this charitable work and trying to maximize opportunity and minimize injustice? So on the organizational side, you probably can guess some of the things are tax related, making sure that entities are incorporated, that they've filed for the right tax exempt status, that they're in compliance with whatever rules and obligations come with those tax exempt that status. But we also do the same things that lawyers do for any commercial or entity. So real estate transactions, we have offices in 3 places. Some of those are leased, some of them we own certain, parts or furniture, equipment. All of that was purchased. We help with employment and labor issues. So hiring and leave policies, and in today's world, COVID rules about how do you bring people back to the office safely? What can you require people to disclose about their vaccination status or health at that day? Are they sick? Are they exposing colleagues? There's labor issues there. There's laws that are applicable. They are different in different states. The New York laws are different than the Texas ones. We help our colleagues in our HR department navigate that. We also, work on litigation issues if the foundation or if the organization or one of our partners ends up in litigation. And then, more generally, we keep an eye out for risk, right? We are trying to help our colleagues do their jobs and give in a way that lets them focus on the good work that they're doing and not be caught up in having to deal with, oh, we forgot to fill out some form or file something. That's not what they want to be focused on. They want to be focused on making change and having an impact. So let me give you some more specific examples. One of my colleagues, Walter Katz, is an expert on policing reform. That is an area that's gotten a lot of attention for good reason, well, for bad reasons, right? But it's great that it's finally getting attention, that there are reforms happening. And so there's a lot of interest in that field. And so Walter's getting calls, hey, can you talk to a legislator about a bill that they want to introduce or that they've already introduced? Well, in some states, if you talk to a legislator, if you tell them what they should or shouldn't do, that's lobbying, and that requires you to register as a lobbyist or to disclose that you had that conversation. That's good, but it also means we need to make sure if Walter's having that conversation that we know what those rules are and that he's following those rules. So we work with him as well as outside counsel because those rules are different in every single state and in some cities. So that's a lot to keep track of. We also help the organization with, like I said, any of those contracts that come up. So for example, if we are renting a space for a facility, for an event we're hosting, people are going to come and there's going to be a panel and a discussion, and who's paying for that? Which of our entities is paying for that? What are the commitments that we're making? If, for example, we can't host it because rules change about in-person gatherings because of an outbreak of COVID in that area. So we're the ones we are helping our colleagues think about what those risks are, what Arnold Ventures is obligated to do, and making sure that we're being careful and protecting the organization, but also supporting the cool work that they're doing. We want to host that meeting. We wanted everybody to come and learn about how we can lower prescription drug costs across the country. We also, support their grant making. So if one of our program team wants to make a grant and they want this grantee, they're working with this grantee, they're going to build a website that's going to let you in each state measure how much pension costs are escalating in that state. Well, that's a really interesting area. And we're going to help them think through things like who's going to own that website when the grant period ends? And what do we need to do to register that, to have the right trademarks, copyrights, and make sure that it stays updated once the grant ends so that there's not information out there that's wrong with our name on it. That wouldn't be great. So those are just a couple of day-to-day examples. There's a lot more, but that's the kind of thing we do for the organization. And then we'll talk more about, Jesse's gonna take over here and talk a little bit more about what kind of lawyers and the skills of a lawyer in that space.
Thank you, Dina. And thank you everyone for making the time today. So let's level set a little bit. At this point in the presentation, you've heard a little bit more about kind of how the sausage gets made. What does it actually mean to be a lawyer in philanthropy? Are you just giving away money? Like, what does this actually entail? I think the other kind of big piece of the picture here, which, and I'll say this personally in my own experience, I think it can get lost in the weeds. It certainly did for me when I was in your position in law school, is really considering and thinking about, well, how do I fit here? Are my own natural skills, gifts, abilities, personality traits, how do they work well here? How might they, be something that I'll have to work on or be aware of? And so we want to shed a little light for you today on, and with the caveat that these are by no means universal or a prerequisite, but I think it's fair to say that thematically, these are a couple personality traits that we see time and time again in attorneys who choose this path. And on the point about exclusivity, I just want to provide hopefully a little note of encouragement. As you can see, and as you heard already from just Vanessa and Roxanne, there is no one path here. And I think most of us have crisscrossed a career between private sector, public sector, and may do so again in the future. I know when I was in your shoes, it's very easy to kind of get lost in a 5-year plan, or lean into those type A tendencies and think that there's one path. And as I reflected, on the years from when I graduated up to here, if I would have compared that drafted plan to what actually happened, it couldn't have been more wrong. And yet, in totality, I wouldn't have changed a thing. So you will surprise yourself by what you come across and what you see is possible. And a big part of this, and I'll dive in after this, but a big part of this is listening to your inner voice of who you are and what you're all about. That's something I wish I did more of, rather than just thinking about the external. So to that end, and it wouldn't be a PowerPoint presentation without lots of quotes. I want to provide one quote. It's attributed to Walt Whitman. I have no idea whether that's a fair attribution or not, but we're going to run with it. So you may have heard the saying, "I am large, I contain multitudes." Well, just remember, you are large, you contain multitudes. You will be shocked, I promise you, whatever you decide to do with your career in law or otherwise after graduating. All that you'll learn, all the skills that you will develop. You'll learn great and horrible phrases like attention to detail is very important, Jesse. And you'll really learn for the first time what that attention to detail means. And you may not think that you're able to do it, but you'll find that you can do it. And so don't get discouraged. And to the extent you can look at everything glass half full, I think you'll be surprised by the opportunities that show up in front of you. So to that end, a couple of thematic notes that I think are both anecdotally representative amongst our legal team here, but also I think by and large, you'll generally find this to be the case with folks in philanthropy generally. And I say this as someone who's been at the exact opposite end of the spectrum, who started off in private practice, first in corporate finance and then private equity, and then worked in-house at a private equity firm. So I've really kind of been, exact opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's noticeable, the difference. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Entrepreneurial. So this one may seem weird at first. It's not like we're talking about an episode of Silicon Valley or, starting the next new Facebook here. We're talking about being an attorney at a philanthropy or in the nonprofit space. What we mean here is more of a mindset, a mindset of being able to roll up your sleeves and dive in when there isn't a clear path or a clear playbook. And there's a reason for this. At both Arnold Ventures and most other philanthropies, in addition to the nonprofit space generally, we are lean. And there are pros and cons to that, right? And like anything in life, as you think about what your first job is going to be, there are pros and cons that you're going to have to weigh. And that's the case here with philanthropy as well. So let's think about this in terms of challenges and opportunities. So the opportunities here, what does that mean? And when I say, staffing is lean, well, it means we try to maximize and do a lot with what we have. That's not an awful way of saying it, but really the best way to think about it is every dollar we spend on, say, my salary, that is one less dollar that is going out the door directly to a project or to a cause, which is the whole reason why this enterprise was stood up in the first place. And so as a result, from a personnel perspective, we're lean. And a big positive here, but this is where the entrepreneurial mindset really comes to fore, is you're going to get exposed to a lot. You're going to have the ability, and this is either a pro or con, depending upon how you look at it, to be involved in a lot of different things, some of which are strictly legal, some of which are legal adjacent, some of which aren't legal at all. And for a lot of people, that may be very attractive. For other people, it may be like, gosh, like, let me focus on one thing. And so just be aware that your ability to be a wallflower, and it, no normative judgments there, but like your ability to be a wallflower and just do your own thing and focus on one or two things, that doesn't happen as much in this space, but you'll get exposed to a lot, including kind of the quote unquote business side. And so beyond that, and I think this is for me personally, the most important thing to note is passion. And this is why I think it's important. Going back to that opportunities and cost framework, and thinking about the calculus, right? Okay, what's the trade-off choosing this path or dabbling in this path, or for however long you're here? Well, a cheap trade-off is if your goal is to maximize your compensation, package, absent some, unusual circumstances, choosing philanthropy probably isn't going to be the path. So, why do people do it? Well, I mean, I don't have to belabor the point because you guys are all here. But there's a wonderful opportunity that I feel most of us do not get in the modern day labor force, to be involved in something that A, we believe in, and hopefully B, that you feel is having an impact. But it's a very personal calculus about how valuable that is to you. As someone who if you look at my brief career to date, started in the Peace Corps, did corporate finance, did private equity, and then moved to a private equity firm, and now I'm here. I can tell you, for me personally, it's worth its weight in gold. It affects how you view your day to day. It affects your whole life, potentially. And so just something to think about as you're thinking about, trade-offs and looking at your student loan balance and, and all that stuff. That passion is here in spades as a result, because you have a lot of people here who are interested and committed about what they're doing. And working at an institution and at a place where that is the reality makes a big difference in your day to day. So just something to keep in mind. And then lastly here, and this ties into the last point, collaboration. It's not just the legal team, which is united by some general sense of purpose and impact, but it's everybody here. To certain degrees, the dynamics that I was just talking about in terms of trade-offs apply to the rest of the organization and other departments as well. And so you end up in a place where you are surrounded by people who are passionate, who are committed, and that just makes a huge difference day to day in terms of your own experience and in terms of the level of collaboration which results. To give you a counterexample, at a firm I will not name, you might have an experience if you go the firm route where it's kind of the opposite, where it's more of a eat what you kill dynamic, mercenary dynamic. And I will say that when you're applying your labor and efforts and blood and sweat to something, it makes a big difference which environment and culture you're in. And so moving on to the next slide here, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because Google is your friend, but I'll tell you why we're highlighting this. Your legal degree, we have a whole presentation on, you can do anything with a law degree, and that is both, very true and also not true. But in one respect, where it is true, you can do a lot in philanthropy with the skills and abilities you're learning now. And the reason we want to touch upon this, rather than kind of give you a deep dive of anything you can find yourself learning about what a program officer does at a philanthropy or grants officer, and we'll touch on that. What's more important, and something I never realized, and we want to make sure is just on your radar screen, is that there are a lot of other possibilities which you probably haven't heard anything about and may not hear about again after you leave this presentation in this space. And so very briefly here, a program officer, if you think about Dina's examples in the criminal justice space, when she's working with a colleague who's putting forth a proposal, which then gets debated and revised and then presented to the boardroom and argued over whether it's going to be thumbs up or thumbs down. That's what a program officer is going to do. A grants officer is think of it as kind of an ombudsman who's reviewing grantee reports. In some organizations, they also handle some legal aspects. The financial officer, again, we all chose law school and not MBA, so I won't spend time here, but just keep in mind that there's a lot you can do, which isn't strictly legal with your law degree in this space. And then finally, I just want to touch upon this very briefly on the next slide. In addition to other jobs in philanthropy, there are other legal jobs in nonprofits. Philanthropy is just one small segment of the nonprofit space. And so you heard Roxanne, speak about her experience as a GC. I think more relevant to where you're at in your careers, and something to keep in mind or explore if it, kind of tickles an interest, is you can be an attorney as a direct service provider. Think, legal aid, affordable housing, domestic violence support, where you're really one-on-one in client support, or as a policy expert, and whether on the Hill, whether at a think tank or otherwise. So there are a lot of possibilities which aren't apparent at first blush. And so with that, I'll turn this over to Vanessa.
So I'm sure you're wondering, we told you a lot about different jobs. A lot of those jobs aren't entry-level jobs. So why are we talking to you about them now? Well, we wanted to take this opportunity to expose you to sort of these alternative legal careers. When I was in law school, I had two choices. I could go to a private firm or I could go into the public sector. It wasn't until much later in my career that I became aware of the opportunities in philanthropy. And we want you to have these opportunities up front. We provided this overview to you today and the few additional resources on the slide to give you the options in your career should a traditional legal path not fit you. In addition, we wanted to take this time to expose you to some interesting legal questions that are raised in the philanthropic space. And so to this end, I want to highlight an opportunity that was made available by one of our philanthropic partners, the Hewlett Foundation. They're offering a year-long fellowship to 10 students, ranging from 1L, 2L, 3L year. The fellowship will expose you to the tax-exempt, practice of law. It'll provide you with opportunities for mentorship. It'll also assist you in creating a network of other law students that are interested in pursuing this practice. The fellowship, it also includes a fully paid trip to an in-person continued legal education symposium at the University of Texas Law School. It's called the 39th Annual Nonprofit Organization Institute. It's going to be held on January 12th through the 14th in 2022. And it'll be held at the Four Seasons in Austin, Texas. The conference, it brings together kind of nationally recognized experts from private foundations, public charities, law, finance, and government officials, all to discuss sort of the latest changes in tax, legislative, as well as governance issues that affect nonprofit organizations. In addition to this opportunity to partake in this CLE, you'll also be paired with a practicing lawyer during that 2.5-day institute. It'll give you the opportunity to sort of have that one-on-one connection, and as well as to continue that connection over the course of the fellowship. So myself and my team, we attend this conference every year, and I can tell you that it's a great opportunity for you to network in Texas if you plan to practice here, but also across the United States if you're interested in tax-exempt law as a whole. I plan to circulate this full deck with Ms. Taylor, as well as make the contact information related to this particular opportunity available to her. I will note up front that this opportunity requires a recommendation. And the deadline to apply is actually coming up pretty quickly. The deadline is October 15th. So if you're interested in applying for this opportunity, I would highlight to please do so and to do so soon. In addition, I'm going to provide my contact information if you all have any questions about Arnold Ventures or about the tax-exempt practice of law generally. And now we're going to take this time to sort of open up the space for any questions that you might have for us about our organization or anything that we talked about today. And I'm going to turn over to Ms. Taylor in case there are any questions in the chat.
Thank you so much. Before I get to any questions, I just wanted to let the students know that the University of Texas Nonprofit Institute materials are currently on Simplicity. So we received information about that a couple of weeks ago. So you guys can find all the information for that on Simplicity if you're interested in applying. And again, I just want to second the great opportunity. So we do have some students on the call. I'm happy to open up if you guys want to unmute to ask your questions directly. Hold on, just. Ms. Coronado, did you have a question?
Yes. I'm sorry. I heard you mentioning something about the recommendation, which is due the 15th. What exactly were you referring to?
So there's an application that's due on October 15th for the University of Texas's Nonprofit Law Institute.
Yes.
So that application is due on October 15th, and you can find that on Simplicity in the job postings.
Okay, perfect. I heard all of that. I just didn't know if there was a separate recommendation that she had mentioned. I thought she said something about, okay, no worries. I'll look at it. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming.
Of course. Thank you so much for attending. So there is a recommendation that's required as part of the application, but it's all due together on the 15th.
Okay. So what is that? Just a recommendation from a professor or a employer, or is it from someone from Arnold? That's what I was
No. It does not have to be a person from Arnold. I believe that it can just be a professional recommendation, whether that's someone that you work for or one of your professors.
Thank you so much.
And let me note that the actual institute, it usually brings in 200 to 300 individuals. So it's a big institute and a great opportunity for you to sort of rub shoulders with other lawyers that are in the field and ask them tons of questions.
Thank you, Ashley.
We are ready for lots of questions. I mean, I wanted to see Vanessa under pressure. Somebody, anybody.
I thought I saw Leanne's hand up, but she's muted. So I do see a question in the chat, so I'll start with that. One of the participants says, "Thanks so much for the presentation. He was previously a major gifts officer at a Catholic high school in San Antonio and noticed that there seem to be a lot of lawyers in the nonprofit space. Why do you think that is?"
I will kick this over to my colleague, Dina.
I think there's a couple reasons. I think one of them is that a lot of folks go to law school because they want to do good in the world and they want to make a difference. And nonprofits are one of the best places to do that because there is such a diversity of opportunities and a common purpose that you can work for a nonprofit that's focused on any number of issues and working on any number of ways to help people and to make our world a better place. I also think that there's a lot of skills that you learn as a lawyer that are useful in the nonprofit space. And some of that is approaching things methodically and thinking through what's the problem statement and how do we solve it. And also, yeah, what are the rules that apply here? What can we as a nonprofit do under our charter, under our governing body? And, you know, what can't we do and how do we navigate that? So I think, I don't know, I'm sure there's other answers there too, but I think it's because a lot of lawyers want to do good in the world and this is a field where you can.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat that goes towards the tax nature or the tax aspect of your practice. And the question says, is it required that one is an expert in tax law or maybe has an LLM or a specialty in tax law to be successful in this practice area?
I'll direct that to Roxanne.
That was a rude thing that Vanessa just did. She's directing it to me because I have the least tax expertise of everyone on my team. So the answer is no. I will say this, you know, it is very helpful. And I think just in life generally, regardless of what particular path you pursue, it is helpful to have a basic understanding of federal income tax and like just federal tax principles. But I mean, for me, I took one FIT class in law school and then, you know, I don't remember if it was on the Texas bar exam, whatever, probably was. And so, you know, for me, that was sufficient. But as an M&A practitioner, even though I wasn't an expert in tax, every single transaction involved some tax implication. So, you know, there was a lot of sort of on the margins and a lot of dealing directly with my tax experts who were on sort of my team to talk through the various implications in any given joint venture or acquisition or disposition or whatever, even if I wasn't the expert. Obviously, there's a distinct body of tax exempt law. It is something that, I mean, it would be wonderful if you have an interest in this sort of industry, if you could pick up some of that experience, but I don't think that you have to focus on it necessarily in anticipation of a career in philanthropy. And there are ways of doing that. For example, I sit on a number of nonprofit boards. And so I did have some familiarity with this, right? Like I sit on the board of the Houston Zoo and the Houston Parks Board and then Discovery Green downtown. And you kind of pick up some of the lingo and understand that there are these periodic filings and those sorts of things. So, you know, I would certainly recommend having at least that level of familiarity. But if one day you decide your heart is really in this work, do not be discouraged in any way by sort of your background. As we've heard from our team members now, Jesse was M&A private equity, like me. Jesse has a little, you know, bit of finance in there too. Dina, right, litigation, and Vanessa, wait, what?
No tax. I had no tax.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yes, no tax. Vanessa, you know, was like defeating all the bad guys in a courtroom. Krista, more of a healthcare bent. So there really are different ways you can pick it up with the right set of team, with the right set of team members. And you know, the most important thing are some of the things that Jesse talked about in his presentation, sort of the intangibles, and then just being really, really focused on attention to detail, having a great work ethic, and an outstanding attitude, and you got it made.
All right, thank you. So we've had a couple more questions come in the chat. The next one is, what law school course or knowledge do you find yourself using most frequently in the philanthropic field?
I will point this one to Krista. She's new to the philanthropic field, but she has experience on that side personally as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of the work that we do, even in the philanthropic world, comes down to contracts, whether that be a grant agreement or an internal lease for our building space. And so just knowing those concepts of, unfortunately, consideration, liability, termination, all those basic contract principles will end up coming up in almost any area of law. So that's really helpful. And I took tax law, the basic tax law course in law school. I'm not sure what of that I retained, but I can't say that it would hurt.
Wonderful. Anybody else want to chime in with any courses that they found particularly helpful? Or yeah, everybody agrees, contracts. Okay, well, there's your answer. And then the next question is, would you recommend that a student use their nonprofit association, the supervisor from that organization on the recommendation, or a law school professor for the recommendation?
So I would probably say, use the person that knows you best and that will provide the best recommendation. The entire idea of this fellowship is, first off, giving an opportunity to students to be more involved in tax-exempt organizations generally, and in the practice of law in the sort of the tax-exempt space, but particularly for students that are not really represented on the tax-exempt space. I think that our team is a diverse team with diverse backgrounds. This is more rare in tax-exempt organizations. As you can imagine, like a lot of legal institutions, it tends to lean very male and very not representative of sort of the diversity of our country. And so this is an opportunity really to highlight and to provide an opportunity to hopefully, inspire law students to want to be in this practice and want to be able to, commit themselves to the work of the public good. So if whoever can say that the best related to you and, your desire to do this work, I'd say pick that person.
Great. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I do want to again, solicit anybody who's on the call that wants to unmute and ask their question. I know some of our students are in the law school building, so they're having some quiet or some noise issues. So does anybody else have a question? Or you can type it in the chat and I can ask it for you. We've got about 5 minutes left on our scheduled presentation time. Okay. Well, I think that's it. Is there any more information that any of the team members would like to share from Arnold Ventures, or maybe the favorite, this is a good question, maybe the favorite matter or case that you've had the opportunity to work on, just, for us to get a feel for, what you enjoy doing?
So I will note something that I did not include on the slide, but I will provide to you, Ms. Taylor, is our website. We often list opportunities as they're available in our organization, both if we have a legal position open, but also sort of the programmatic areas that Jesse mentioned. And I'll defer to my team if anyone has a specific thing that they just absolutely love that they did and that they want to share. And also thank you, Ms. Taylor, for all of your assistance, for allowing us to speak to your students. Thank you for all the students that are on this chat today. As a personal request from lawyers on the philanthropic side, we need you, we need your minds, we need your thoughts. So if you are at all interested, please look into this work.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you guys for sharing your time. Did anybody want to share one of their success stories, or, oh, Jesse, go right ahead.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in and share an anecdote, which I think kind of builds a little bit upon what I was talking today. And so we talked about how, one of the benefits, depending upon, your point of view and your interests, is that you can do a lot as an attorney, which you might not, strictly think as being attorney related once you're in the philanthropic space. A good example of that this year, and something that our team does all the time, is we assist the organization with strategy around coming up with rollouts for strategic initiatives. So whenever the organization wants to do something new, WeGo is very much involved, and sometimes, depending upon the project, the point of the spear, if you will. And a good example of that is something called the Beta Fund, which in short is a pilot program here at AV that WeGo and everyone on this call played a role in putting together, where essentially our leadership came to us and a few others and said, hey, look, we want to do something big. We give away all this money to all these great causes, but we have some untapped potential here at AV. Folks who see this, all day, every day, folks who have ideas of their own. And so we want to, engage that talent. We want to, get them involved some way, and we want to hear their ideas. And not only do we want to hear their ideas, but we want to hear the big ideas, the risky ones, which, probably will fail, but we want to hear them anyway. So how can we do that? Well, after, a lot of meetings with various departments, and again, we put a pretty big role in the formation and the structure and the rollout of all of this. That went live, and we had over 40 people at our organization, pitch their radical idea, which if it hits, it may not, but if it hits, it could have a really positive impact, sustainable impact on an area of policy here in the United States. And then what does that mean? Ideally, that means you're affecting the lives of a lot of people in a material way, and that is so cool, right? And I think about my time in both in-house at a private equity firm or in private practice. Like, you have some other interesting things, but nothing like that. And so don't limit yourself, and don't limit your imagination about what's possible. I see a question here, and we can address this if we have time. And I'm being winded, so I'll stop. But about can you do this at entry level? The short answer is yes. It might be a bit of a challenge, but you can. And we have examples here at AV of JDs who went straight into something like this, either at AV or otherwise.
All right, well, thank you all so much. I think that Jesse did address the last question that was in the chat. So with that being said, I guess we will close the presentation. Once again, thank you to all the team members from Arnold Ventures for your time and putting together that PowerPoint presentation, which I thought was very interesting. So we learned a lot more, and definitely any students that are interested in engaging more with Arnold Ventures or finding out more information, please just reach out to me and I will connect you with the information or the person that you need to reach. So thanks everyone so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.